a chance to tour 114 Missouri counties. What are you here to report?
Well, I'm here to report that there's lots of great things going on in our state. People always have interesting ways to figure out how to make a living and try to improve the communities they live in. And if we'll do the right thing with energy policy and transportation policy, the world food needs are going to drive a lot of our great agricultural production. I think the country's ready to make things again. And when I finished that second round of visits in every Missouri county, I think we tabulated up the official things I've done in the state, the scheduled events in the last 4 years, and there were somewhere in excess of 1,000 of those, and again, including 230 in all 114 counties, and then 115 would be the city of St. Louis, which in our state counts like it was a county.
When you say transportation needs, are you talking about roads and bridges, or are you talking about something else?
I'm talking about really everything. You know, when I spoke to the General Assembly earlier this year, McGraw, I said, look at a highway map of America, look at a railroad map of America, look at a river map of America, and focus in on any of those three maps where those maps come together, and it's right where we live. So clearly, a highway system that works is important for us. A bridge system that works is a state that I think has more bridges than any other state in the country. But having that railroad system, and maybe even more importantly in terms of how you get things moved around and be competitive in the world, is a river system that works again. And I think the Mississippi River, particularly, if we get there and you can get on it, is a tremendous asset. If you get there and you can't get on it, it's just a big river that's in the way.
Do you have a suggestion on how the state or the federal government can help pay for this, whether it's federal gas tax, sales tax, toll roads? Do you have any suggestions?
I think at the federal level there will not be a gas tax increase, and what we're trying to find right now is how to fill that gap between what the gas tax now produces and reasonable expectations for what we should do in transportation. It's about $15 billion or so a year, and one of the top priorities for the Congress right now is to find 5 or 6 years of that $15 billion so that we can have a multi-year highway bill, and you can build roads and bridges 5 and 6 years at a time, not 2 years or 6 months at a time. We can't keep, it's just not the smart way to do what needs to be done. And then states, including ours, will have to look at what that multi-year federal program looks like and figure out what they need to do to maximize how to be part of that. We finally have moved Missouri in the last few years from where we'd traditionally been a donor state to now we pretty much get all of our money back. Actually, in our state, we'd be better off if we just kept the money and spent it the way we wanted to without the federal government being involved, but it's unlikely that's going to be the rewrite of the highway bill. But we need a multi-year highway bill, and our state can really benefit from where we live and the great advantage of where we live.
One of the things that affects both rural and urban areas in St. Louis and in the Missouri is the drug problem, whether it's a meth problem or the heroin problem. Many people are calling it an epidemic. Is there anything that can be done to help solve this heroin and or drug problem that is rampant in Missouri?
I think we need to find out what can be done. On the meth problem, we had some good success a few years ago with the Combat Meth Act that I introduced, worked for, got into law, which basically took a lot of the ingredients off the shelf and put them either behind the counter or not available at all. Something I'm working on right now in the appropriating committee I chair, which has the National Institute of Health funding, the NIH funding, where we do all the research on these. WashU is one of the great health research institutions in the country, but looking at opioids, people who are increasingly becoming dependent on prescription drugs that then they cut and do various things to, so they can inject them right into their system, and that's a big growing problem as well. But all three of those areas, the opioid problem, the meth problem, heroin problem, have to be dealt with, and we need to be looking for ways to solve that problem.
Is there a new defense bill coming down the pike?
Well, there needs to be. I did the response to the president this weekend and talked about the defense bill. The president said he'll actually veto the defense bill if we don't agree to spend more money on other things, even though the defense bill is a bill that the Congress is trying to get on the president's desk at exactly the amount of money he said we needed to defend the country. And he said, well, I'd be glad, I guess his position is I'd be glad to sign that, but only if you give me more money for the IRS and only if you give me more money for the EPA. And this idea that somehow defense is not the top priority of the federal government. It's the one thing that we know that we can't do by ourselves, and state and local government can't defend the country. It's a top priority. It needs to be looked at that way, and there's no holding defense hostage unless the Congress is willing to come up with new money in addition to what the law allows for everything else.
Do you support more troops in Afghanistan? Do you support that action by the president?
Well, I think Iraq was the decision he made. I'm certainly for leaving troops in Afghanistan so we don't have the disaster that was created when the Iraqi government no longer had to talk or had the opportunity to talk and deal with Americans who were there, or more importantly, the Iraqi military. I think a lot of what's happened today was the huge mistake of making great gains and then walking away from those great gains. But I don't know how, unless you're going to make a difference in Iraq, there has to be somebody on the ground. Prefer it not be American troops, prefer it be troops from the neighborhood, but you can't do what we're trying to do there with air power alone.
Senator Blunt with us. One more question here. The Supreme Court is getting ready to rule on Obamacare, and there is somebody in Missouri who got their insurance, their health insurance, from the Federal Exchange. If the Supreme Court rules a certain way, they might actually rule that health policy is unconstitutional. What are you telling that person in Missouri who might lose their health insurance because the Supreme Court says it will be unconstitutional? What are you telling those people?
Well, as I understand the case, and I'm not a lawyer, which is, by the way, usually the most popular thing I say. As I understand the case, it's not that the exchange would be declared unusable, but the subsidy that you might get. So I'm sure some people got their insurance through the exchange without a subsidy, but the insurance is now so dramatically more expensive, or about to be, than it was before the president's health care plan went into effect, that it may be almost nobody can afford health insurance through the exchange on their own. And 250,000 Missourians get a subsidy. Our goal, my goal certainly would be not to penalize the individuals, but to find a way that they can continue to get the insurance that they currently have, but not perpetuate the mistakes in the president's health care plan.
So what happens to those people? Do those 250,000 people lose insurance the day after the Supreme Court rules?
No, under any circumstance I can imagine, they don't lose insurance, but they may lose the ability to get a subsidy, and the court may decide that, and we're going to impose this correct reading of the law at the end of the year, at the end of the fiscal year, almost, there will be some time, hopefully more rather than less, if that's what the court decides, so we can figure out how to help these families who are dramatically impacted by insurance rates that in our state on the individual policy next year, some of the requests for increase are as high as 34%. In the state of South Dakota, I've looked at last week, 70% of all the individually written insurance there comes through the various Blue Cross Blue Shield companies. They applied for a 43% increase this year to next year. And so people have a big problem, and a lot of it is because they're required under the law to get insurance for things that they don't need to be insured for with deductibles they can't afford.
Are you hoping the Supreme Court rules the subsidy unconstitutional?
But the court will decide that. They'll decide it in the next 10 days. I'm hoping we can deal with the decision they make, and hoping we can have the right kind of debate about better health care for Americans and better access to policies and insurance they can afford.
Senator Roy Blunt, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for stopping by. Be safe travels, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Hey, buddy, good to talk to you, and see you soon.
You got it. Senator Roy Blunt, ladies and gentlemen, never shies away from a question and, comes and picks up his mail all the time. We should say he was supposed to be here in studio, but he had a flight cancellation, a flight delay, so he couldn't be here in studio. But he's always appreciated anytime he wants to swing by. 7:48, traffic, weather, sports next, KTRS.
Encore Consignment Gallery is celebrating its second anniversary. The